Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. Dan Lust, joined this week by Stephanie Weissenburger. Steph, it's been a minute. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. There is always no shortage of sports law news, and we're always at the forefront. So happy to be here again.
Dan Wallach is in parts that are undisclosed. He is again in a different time zone, so it is sometimes difficult to find a time for Dan. Dan is actually on a lovely vacation this week, so we will hold down the fort for him until he gets back. So this week, obviously, we covered already the Robert Sarver stuff. There's some different stories brewing. Obviously, we covered the Luka lawsuit. A story that broke last night that we got enough DMs to cover it. We wanted to make sure we covered it the right way. Was this Brett Favre saga over in the state of Mississippi? Some fraud claims. People know Brett Favre, obviously, Hall of Fame quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, moved down to the Jets and the Vikings, but his story in the chapter of his life is now taking a very different turn. You have people online saying maybe, his credentials for the Hall of Fame should be revoked, and then brings up a messy conversation about O.J. Simpson and Lawrence Taylor. But we felt it appropriate to dive deep into it. It's a very interesting story about political corruption and a very famous football player being at the very heart of this and diverting money that should have gone to the citizens and directing it to a Southern Mississippi volleyball arena. So it's a messy story. So what we're going to do, Steph, you and I are going to chat, and then we're going to bring in, I'm going to step aside. We're going to have a roundtable with Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, Tarun Sharma, obviously our contributor, now a fancy sports law professor at University of Minnesota, and Jason Morrin, friend of ours and a first-year lawyer over at Popak Law, a good friend of ours. So before we get into the substantive matters, we haven't done a podcast like this in a while, talking about career advice, talking about different elements. So we'll talk a little bit about your career path, mine, and then we'll get right into the farm stuff. So reminder, podcast sponsored by Themis Bar Review, top bar prep company in the entire galaxy. Steph, pop quiz. Which bar prep company did you use?
None other than Themis. Another pop quiz. I'm going to give myself a pop quiz. Did I pass on the first try? Yes. Was it because of Themis? Absolutely.
I've never heard of a self-pop quiz, but do they teach you that at Themis? Is that part of the model?
That's part of the model. You got to give yourself some pop quizzes in the head, con law, contracts, get the multiple choice questions really going. And, Themis sets you up for success. That is a fact.
Steph, let's do this. I don't want to bury the lead. This is going to be a Brett Favre heavy substantive podcast. People want to hang around at the end. We'll talk some career advice and whatnot, but I think it's probably a good time to just go straight into the Favre conversation. Again, Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, he's over at Tympanick Law. He's got his own firm. And then Taryn's going to, MC the conversation. Again, first year lawyer, but he's a professor over at University of Minnesota Law. And Jason over at Popak Law. So three of those guys, I think, can handle it. And then you and I will rejoin the conversation on the back end, talk some career stuff and just some fun sports management, sports business, some fun networking stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Let us kick it over to the roundtable, the Brett Favre Mississippi fraud conversation.
All right, guys. I think one of the biggest stories this week has been the story that broke in Mississippi Today online by Anna Wolf. And it's really just an excellent piece of research and writing. And I think that anyone who's listening to this, you should go back and read this article. It's titled "Former Governor Phil Bryant Helped Brett Favre Secure Welfare Funding for University of Southern Mississippi Volleyball Stadium, Text Reveal." And so this has been an ongoing civil case in the state of Mississippi. So before we get started, I think we should all introduce ourselves. Tarun Sharma, people know me from the podcast and I do the newsletter. Jason?
Yeah, thanks, Tarun. For those who don't know me, my name is Jason Morrin. I'm in my second career week as a law clerk, fresh off the July 2022 bar exam at New York City firm Zampano, Patricius, and Popak. I haven't been on the podcast in a while, so it's good to get back. The story we have today is a bit of a scary one, a little upsetting.
And I'm attorney Matthew Tympanick of Tympanick Law, practicing criminal defense, personal injury, and sports law in Sarasota, Florida.
Today, we're going to talk about this case, what has happened so far, and what might happen here going forward, especially from the federal side. So before we really jump into it, I think it's really important that the listeners know the key parties at stake here. So the first one, and probably the biggest name in terms of government, is Phil Bryant. He's a Mississippi native, an alumnus of the University of Southern Mississippi, and that's where a lot of this story focuses on. He was governor for 8 years, lieutenant governor for 4 years before that, auditor for 12 years before that, which is deeply ironic. Then there's Brett Favre, another Mississippi native, another graduate of the University of Southern Mississippi, and probably the most decorated athlete in Mississippi sports history. Obviously, NFL Hall of Fame quarterback, and his daughter played volleyball at the University of Southern Mississippi. So he had this idea that he wanted to build them a new volleyball stadium while she was there. Then there's the News. This is Nancy New and her son, Zach New. And they ran the nonprofit, the Mississippi Community Education Center, which received millions in TANF funding, which is temporary assistance to needy families. And Nancy is friends with Deborah Bryant, who was the former first lady of the state of Mississippi, and Zach is her son. And the News have both pled guilty to a litany of felonies, both federal and state felonies, that leave them exposed to over 100 years in prison, if I read that correctly, for misappropriating these funds. And a key charge for Zach was in his plea deal admitting that he had wrongfully directed this money that was intended for some of the poorest residents in the entire country and using that for the stadium. So with that, Jason, why don't you give us a timeline of like when these events took place, and then we can kick it to Matt.
Thanks, Tarun. The actual receipt of the federal funding was back in 2018 by the Mississippi Department of Human Services, in which they did receive that money for TANF, which makes this story all the worse. And when you think about who the money was supposed to support and why, especially in a state that is widely considered or may be statistically, the state with the most poverty. And roughly 77 million of those dollars, the 135 million, were misdirected based on the key players you mentioned. So now you fast forward to 2022 in May, MDHS sued 38 people, resulting a lot from the plea deals when some of the names were revealed and other information that they received. So that included Brett Favre, retired WWE wrestler, Ted DiBiase Sr. Since then, the floodgates have kind of opened. In July 2022, we have a letter from Congressman Benny Thompson, which is when the Brett Favre allegations kind of became a bit criminal, as he's asking the DOJ to look into them.
Matt, can you talk a little bit about the charges that have been filed right now against the News, what they've pled out to, and what we might expect to see here in the next week or so?
So the biggest charge that you're going to see is the most misappropriation of federal funds by taking, I think it was something like $90 million that they got from the federal government. Them being a nonprofit, that money has been entrusted to them to make sure it finds its way to the poorest of the poor in the state of Mississippi. Remember, like Jason said, Mississippi is the poorest state in the nation, and this money was intended to be used to help its citizens and temporarily. However, that doesn't seem like it was actually the case. And as you saw, Nancy and Zachary both pled guilty, and they're going to receive federal prison sentences. However, another condition of their plea deals is that they agree to testify against other people in other ongoing investigations. For me, when I saw that notion, you don't have, these two people are barely front page news. They're going to be on it, and then people are going to forget their names. However, and the feds know that. However, their value is that they can piece together a potential conspiracy. The conspiracy potentially including Governor Phil Bryant, his wife, and Brett Favre. What was potentially damning for me is seeing the text messages, which Brett Favre was going back and forth. Like, is there any way this is ever going to get back to me? Is there ever going to be a way for somebody to find out that how much I was actually been paid? Answer, no, we're never going to publicize that. So when you see that, you see this scheme, if it were to defraud. And let's talk about how a federal investigation works. It's different than in the state level. They usually just don't go out and arrest somebody and start the case. What happens is a federal agent, this is a public corruption case of white collar crime in college. And obviously I'm now a federal criminal defense attorney, as well as a former felony prosecutor. A federal agent creates an investigation. He combs through evidence, he interviews witnesses, and he starts to get arrests or indictments on low-level people. The News are a perfect example of people who have been soon to be convicted, and they are potential witnesses. From that, you have to create the story, because once you do that, that's how you get it to an assistant United States attorney who will convene a grand jury. In the federal court, to be able to be criminally charged, a federal grand jury has to indict you. We're never going to know about the indictment until the indictment is sealed by the U.S. Attorney of Mississippi. That's not going to be for a while. these text messages give me an idea. If I'm reading the tea leaves, if I were Brett Favre, I would retain an experienced federal criminal defense attorney as soon as possible.
So let me ask you a little bit about that. You're talking about creating this story. How is that process affected when you're going after somebody who's a beloved figure in the state of Mississippi, maybe not so much nationally, given the types of activities that he's been engaged in, but Brett Favre has a very strong legacy in the state of Mississippi. So how do you think that the prosecutors are going about that, if at all, any differently?
Well, definitely with these text messages getting out there and they've essentially gone viral. Obviously, for years, people have had issues with Brett Favre, obviously, as we've just as known about his incident sending lewd photos to a member of the New York Jets front office. But now you're in a situation where a guy who is a Hall of Fame quarterback who made hundreds of millions of dollars in his career is alleged to have received, not really alleged, over $1 million in federal funds to give speeches that he didn't actually make. And this whole process is done to help get a volleyball facility, when in reality, these funds are actually meant for somebody else. And when you include more than one person into this case, as we know from criminal law, it is coined a conspiracy. And you have Phil Bryant, you have Brett Favre, and the news. And from here, federal agents need to tie the people who are misappropriating funds, the news, who have already pled guilty, to the people who are actually going to move the needle, which would be Governor Phil Bryant. He's obviously no longer the governor of Mississippi. I think he resigned in 2020. And Brett Favre, who, of course, is Hall of Fame.
He was termed out. He didn't resign.
Yeah, turned out. Correct. So from here, if you're the feds, you have to have your ducks in a row. Why? Because the people the evidence points to are going to have an army of criminal defense attorneys, and they're going to file every motion humanly possible to try to get this case kicked. So whatever your evidence is, you need to have it cold by the time you convene a grand jury.
And Jason, why is this a problem? What is the issue of using these funds for the creation of a volleyball stadium?
Federally, it's going to be wire or mail fraud, depending on how they did it. The federal government gives out money to states, and they are allowed to attach conditions on that money for how it may be spent. And those conditions must be explicitly followed. So the fact that you take it and do whatever you want, giving people first-class flights, and obviously the plans for the volleyball stadium, that's classic federal fraud. And in the state crime, it's defrauding the government. I think we have federal and state criminal violations here that can easily be charged and found.
Yeah, and so what has been the reaction? The story's been out for about 24 hours. I mean, we were immediately on it, this group, but has this taken off on social media? How are people reacting?
I think they're taking off in a big way, because right now people, especially when this all broke about him being paid for speeches he didn't do, people were obviously in arms about it, especially considering it's federal money and they were meant for somebody else, not a Hall of Fame quarterback who's made hundreds of millions of dollars. But now the text messages, the new point of them is looking at what he was actually saying. And the allegations, if those text messages are Brett Favre who is sending them, it's clear looking at it, it shows deceit. It shows a ability, like an intent to defraud and trying to cover up. Like, is this ever going to become public? Are they going to ever know? That's not something you say if you are afraid of what would happen if it were to be made public.
Yeah, there's also this is obviously a national story, and so the Twitter sphere has been going crazy. One thing I saw, which is just extremely honorable, and you really don't see this every day, a New York Times bestseller by the name of Jeff Pearlman saying, "Don't read my book." How often do you see that? Jeff wrote a biography on Brett Favre called The Remarkable, Improbable, Iconic Life of Brett Favre, Gunslinger by Jeff Pearlman. And he quote says, "Looking at it now, if I'm being brutally honest, I'd advise people not to read it. He's a bad guy. He doesn't deserve the icon treatment. He doesn't deserve acclaim, image rehabilitation, warm stories of grid glory. His treatment of Jennifer Sturger was inexcusable. And now, taking money that was designated to help poor people in his state and funneling it back to build Star, a volleyball arena, is so grotesque, so monstrous. I don't know how someone that looks like that in the mirror. I just don't." And then he posts a picture of a burning Brett Favre jersey. So some pretty strong feelings, and I would say rightfully so. This is a really honorable tweet from Jeff, and a lot of other big time reactions. And a lot of that falls on the fact that, we're also dealing with Mississippi, as we discussed, the median income being as low as it is. I've seen videos of people turning on their sinks to brown looking water, if you want to call it that. And then you have someone who just wants to build a volleyball court for his alma mater because his daughter went there and has the so really just disgusting.
Matt, you said that it wouldn't be for a long time, but President Biden did recently appoint a new U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi. It's been a while. That spot has been vacant for 2 years, and this person has some familiarity with the case. Do you think that was intentional? He is appointed someone who he knows is going to go after the former governor, Phil Bryant, and Brett Favre, and not only try to recoup this money, but try to get some sort of punitive measures against these people?
You think about it, there's always a political angle sometimes, unfortunately, in federal criminal investigations, especially in public corruption cases. When I was a law clerk, I think it was my second year, I worked on a case called the United States versus Salvatore De Macy. It was the former Speaker of the House who was convicted of misappropriating federal funds, if it were, and using it into kickbacks. These types of cases usually are very high profile because who you're going after. And definitely what you're going to see is the stories like, oh, you have a Democratic U.S. attorney going after a Republican former governor. I don't think it shouldn't matter in this case. If they're able to tie Phil Bryant to this case and that he was helped and he facilitated misappropriation of federal funds, then he should be indicted. That's what the law said. It shouldn't matter what kind of political party he's actually a part of. For him, he's going to likely, if he were to be charged, face honest services fraud, because if he was potentially getting kickbacks, if it were, from these appropriation of funds. Because based on what I'm seeing right now, there's no connection from the news to Brett Favre, but for Phil Bryant's wife. I think that's how the introduction potentially going to make place. It'll be interesting to see how the feds, if they were to move forward with criminal charges, and I expect them to, how they create the story and connect all the dots.
So they do have the direct conversations between Nancy New and Phil Bryant, and they have the direct conversations between Phil Bryant and Brett Favre. And then they also have Bryant telling Favre how Nancy New should craft this proposal for the use of funds in this lease in the new volleyball stadium. And then Favre communicating that information directly to Nancy New. Do you think any of that one degree of separation is going to save Favre or Bryant, that Bryant was telling Favre and then Favre was telling her?
I don't think so, because what we're seeing direct communication between people who have been convicted of misappropriation of federal funds, who are awaiting sentencing, who will very likely be witnesses to a grand jury, and the man who has sending text messages clearly showing some deceit. Whether that actually, remember, the federal government still has to indict and then prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Brett Favre is innocent until proven guilty. Do those text messages look good? No. But we don't know much more than that, and what he was trying to do and how he was getting a volleyball for his daughter's alma mater. The government still has to put forward their case. And I don't think Brett Favre is going to be able to hide behind, oh, well, this was really Bryant. I really didn't know what was going on. I thought I was doing speeches. That's not going to play. And it's especially not going to play well, like Jason said at the moment, where people in Jackson, Mississippi are turning on their water and it's brown. And this guy was getting allegedly millions of dollars to make speeches he never did, and then tried to engage allegedly in a conspiracy to misappropriate federal welfare funds.
By the way, I don't think the volleyball center is the only thing that he was looking to do here. Nancy and Zach New admitted in their plea deal that they also directed some of the money to Prevacus, which is a Florida company that was trying to develop a concussion drug. So someone pulled up old Favre interviews where he has said that he supported Prevacus, and they're trying to connect the dots. So, that's all speculation now, not as concrete as we have evidence on the other misappropriation. But, this is just the beginning, and we'll see where it goes.
So let me ask you, Matt, do you think that if this conspiracy grows even larger and it's not just this volleyball center, even though that's the most concrete result of this money being misappropriated, if there's also this connection to the concussion drug, do you think that that Brett Favre could see federal prison?
Absolutely. These charges, sometimes you can be sentenced to up to 20 years in prison, some of these charges. Prison is absolutely on the table if he were to be charged and or convicted in this case. These are exceptionally serious charges, and you have somebody who has the means, who has played himself out to be a savior of a state that people are often forgotten about, that is exceptionally poor, who has nothing really at times to be proud of, who is going through a water crisis where people in our own country cannot even get running water. And this guy tried to allegedly profit off this, tried to take funds that were meant for these exact type of people and find its way to himself or other people who he could benefit from. Prison is absolutely on the table if he were indicted and convicted by a federal jury.
So let me change course here just a little bit and jump back to Phil Bryant and the things that he's been accused of doing. He removed John Davis from his position in charge of MDHS. And then Davis obviously has been charged as part of this conspiracy. It was him that was getting these first-class flights with the welfare money from the news. And then we also have Phil Bryant, moving another individual who was investigating the charges. That person was removed from office. Is there any sort of repercussions that a former governor might face for like a political action like this, maybe if they were trying to cover up their own misdoings?
I think that in these types of cases, they could potentially go with the first class flights using federal funds. That is a potential angle, but the feds probably learned their lesson from the Bob McDonnell case, who used to be the former governor of Virginia, where he was tried and convicted of these kind of kickbacks if we're receiving gifts, all of which sounds similar to what Phil Bryant allegedly received. But his case was then overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. And essentially they said, this is politics. If this stuff is criminalized, pretty much any political activity, though. But with this case, if Phil Bryant is shown to be a knowing party in this conspiracy, and he doesn't remember, he doesn't need to know what's actually going on, but he needs to understand that what he was helping to facilitate. In public corruption cases, and this is from my former professor who was an FBI special agent in charge in New England, he said when he was prosecuting Buddy Cianci, who was the former mayor of Providence, all you need to prove in a public corruption case is that they received the money. Not that they did anything with it, that they simply received it. And if Phil Bryant ever got any kind of money as a result of this, even $1, he'll be looking at public corruption charges, honest services fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, you name it.
What about, so there are these text messages between him and Nancy New where the governor is texting Nancy New, did y'all get one of the new programs from DHS? She says, yes, we did. From all the craziness going on, we had been made to believe that we were not getting refunded, but we did. Someone, in quotes, was definitely pulling for us behind the scenes. Thank you. And he sends the smiley face. Is that something like, is there room there for him to be charged?
I think that that's going to be introduced. If he were to be charged by a grand jury, that is something the U.S. attorney is going to introduce into evidence and allow the jury to decide what that means. That's a question of fact. That wouldn't be a question of law. Of course, in a motion in limine, a judge could eliminate that remark as that it's a 403B analysis, that its prejudicial effect outweighs its probative value because it's confusing, it's not really clear. But it's also possible that the judge could potentially let it in and be like, this is a quasi-admission if it were. It's like he's saying if someone quotes, i.e. you, thank you, and he's basically responding, thank you, you're welcome, with that smiley face. That's how I would interpret it if I were a federal criminal defense attorney, but which I am. And that's how I would argue it to a judge, that it's too remote. We don't really know what it's saying. It's not saying it's like someone did this, like, well, I'm happy to help, smiley face. It's just smiley face. So definitely an interesting issue that I'm sure will be heavily litigated.
And one more political question, and then we'll move back to the sports stuff. Brad Pigott, who was an attorney that was representing the state's welfare department in the civil suit, he was also fired from the case by the current governor. Do you think that opens the current governor to possibly being involved in this? And do you think the feds are going to look at Tate Reeves being part of this?
No, I think my instinct as to firing that attorney is the current governor is trying to clean house with all the people who were part of this and not have any taint from the prior administration. Phil Bryant isn't the governor anymore. That lawyer was appointed, if it were hired, when I believe Phil Bryant was still the governor. And if you're the new governor, people are going to be like, why do you still have this person in here? Obviously, she'll probably have to answer questions like, why did you fire him? Are you part of it? But at the same time, I think it could be quickly dispelled as like, I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I wanted everybody who had potentially anything to do with this gone. I want us to start over, a nice clean slate, if it were, and to focus on the issues that matter to Mississippi. It's like, they will do that investigation. I have a water crisis. That's my number one priority right now.
With the athletic department and the key figures there in the administration, what standard would the feds have to prove in terms of those people being charged as well for taking this money?
So this is important. University of Southern Mississippi is a state school, and also receives federal funds. And what you're looking at is they have to be knowing. And if you are University of Southern Mississippi, your standard is knowing and voluntary. You need the requisite criminal intent to be able to actually have the charges be proven against you. If you knew what you were doing, you knew or should have known what you were doing was wrong. That is how you were able to prove criminal intent. And when you take it back to what Favre, that's going to be something the feds are going to have to prove that he knew what he was doing was wrong. And I think what Exhibit A they would use are the text message to Nancy New.
And so, Matt, just wrapping up the criminal aspect of this, what do you expect in the months and the years ahead? Do you think that all of these people are going to go down? Is there any chance that they plea out of this? What do you think? Just your final thoughts on the matter.
Well, from here, the question is, Zachary and Nancy New have cut deals to testify against potentially people. I don't know where the U.S. attorney is with their investigation. I think within the next 6 months, it's potentially an indictment might be unsealed, which means the Southern District of Mississippi convened a grand jury, presented the evidence, had the news testify, and criminal charges potentially filed. There'll either be a true bill or no true bill. And then from there, it'll be unsealed and the litigation process will begin. If I were to guess based on what I am seeing and the deal that was struck with them and the allegations, if I'm a federal prosecutor and I used to be a former felony prosecutor, now I'm a federal criminal defense attorney, I see a connection between the news and Brett Favre and Phil Bryant. And if you can connect the dots, I think you have a very strong public corruption case. Ones where I wouldn't doubt it if both Phil Bryant and Brett Favre actually try their case, unless Brett Favre were to give in some kind of sweetheart deal, because Brett Favre's biggest defense is that I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. I didn't know, or something like that, as opposed to Phil Bryant, whom I don't think will be offered some kind of plea deal unless in the same situation if you were to testify against Favre. It's all about who the U.S. attorney wants to take down, who they believe should be punished. And that's what you're going to see. It'll probably be the next 6 to 12 months. We'll get a better idea as to what's going on with this case.
And we'll keep following it in the meantime. Jason, before we wrap, do you have any final thoughts on this matter?
I mean, I grew up a Jets fan. So when you're a Jets fan, you watch other teams' players for joy, because you can't do that with your own team. So Brett Favre was one of the players who, he was, one of my top 3 favorites growing up. This has happened with a few athletes now where you idolize them as kids and then realize they're actually scumbags when you get a little bit older and realize some of the things they've done and what they've said. So it was really depressing to see. I mean, my opinion of him has already changed over the past few years based on other things, but really upsetting. And I feel for the people of Mississippi who really needed this money. We've spoke about what people there go through. The greed just gets in the way of them getting basic needs. So another discussion that I'd be curious in is, Brett Favre, Hall of Fame quarterback, is this something where we look at his membership in that group? Is this someone we want to represent the Hall of Fame? Or do we, in terms of we, meaning the actual voters and people that make decisions, look strictly at the numbers in his football career? You know, you take away Reggie Bush's Heisman, you have OJ, other cases. I think it's something to look at.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to start sifting back through for guys being not good people off the field, I mean, OJ would be number one, right? Lawrence
Taylor should be up there.
So I can understand if those guys would be part of that same discussion. I'm not sure that murder and this are in the same area, but I think it's definitely worth talking about. So thanks, guys. I really enjoyed discussing this case with you. I think it's really interesting, lots of different layers, and we're going to continue keeping an eye on it. And Matt, I mean, if you think that it's going to go forward to trial, I mean, that'll be a gift that keeps on giving for conduct detrimental.
No doubt. Thanks,
right.
Tarun.
Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, Tarun.
So that was a very interesting conversation. Obviously, we got to get in the weeds in here. Sometimes we'll have podcasts where we can talk about a lot of different topics, but this Brett Favre one was serious enough, bringing up political fraud, football fraud, legacy of Brett Favre. You have people burning books and burning jerseys. It's a pretty serious conversation, so we wanted to treat it appropriately. So, Steph, we've talked about it. I mean, I think people know, Steph, you worked at my firm, Garagos and Garagos, for a period of time. You are no longer with our firm. You were with, I'll let you do your plugs, but Steph, your contributions to conduct detrimental helped you find a job that I think was more in line with what you wanted to make of your career, the sports you're interested in. Do you want to tell the story? I feel like you can tell better than I can.
Yeah, sure. I can tell this story. So I do have conduct detrimental to thank for this. So if you're listening and you haven't written an article for the website yet, let this be your sign that you should definitely write an article about any sports topic and submit it, because you literally have no idea who is looking at the website, who's searching for certain sports law topics and may come across your article on Google. So, little spiel there, but essentially, because of conduct detrimental, I got the job that I'm currently at now. I am a sports and intellectual property attorney for Pardalis and Noavica, located in New York. And long story short, I had written an article about one of my firm's clients, Giannis Antetokounmpo. If you don't know who he is, which I hope you do, he's one of the star players on the Milwaukee Bucks.
I have to stop. It was not your client then. It was Giannis, who happened to be by your client. Yes. It's a very important part of it.
That's true. So Giannis, I wrote an article about the intellectual property filings as well as the pending lawsuits that were filed on behalf of Giannis in connection to, various Etsy and Redbubble and other brands infringing on his intellectual property and publicity rights. And I wrote that article last August, I want to say August 2021, so coming on a year. And, a few months later, actually, I got a LinkedIn request from Tasso Pardalis, the partner at the firm, who is Giannis's intellectual property attorney. He reached out and basically, we started talking. I sent him the article and he said, yep, that's exactly the reason why I added you and wanted to talk to you. We exchanged a few messages. We agreed to meet up for coffee. And by the end of the coffee meeting, he had offered me a job to come join the firm and work on all of these Giannis matters. And so, I really do have conduct detrimental thank there. And even though no one saw the article right when I put it out last August 2021, a few months later, it did resurface. And, that's kind of how I got to the point that I'm at now, doing more work in sports, which is obviously what, a lot of us aspire to do. And so this is your sign. If you haven't written an article yet, you better get to writing, because, it really does lead to opportunities. I know you heard the same thing when you were a law student and growing up as well, that you really have to find a way to set yourself apart from a stack of resumes. And so by showing your passion in writing about different sports topics that you appreciate and you understand, it really does help you become, someone that a company or a firm may want to hire. So that's the story.
So Stephanie, you, I think, told it the right way, but here are the high notes, right? You were at one firm, which is fine. And the reason the only thing I wanted to correct you on was just the client. I see a lot of people go on LinkedIn our client had a great result. And it's like, great. You wrote about your client getting a good result. You know, like it's that Obama meme, like giving a medal to himself or like patting yourself on the back. Congrats.
Yeah.
Stephanie, you were a young lawyer, basically, you know, less than a year out of school, and you were writing about someone else's client, writing about a firm's basically tactic. Did you write the name of the firm in the actual article?
I did. I believe I did.
So, I mean, let's use some common sense. And I've told this story to the students in my class and any students that I can speak to over the phone for, you know, just informational purposes. And like, I don't know, this might be embarrassing or cringe, as the kids say these days, but I get Google hits on myself. If anybody uses the term Dan Lust in any article, or we get quoted, or the podcast gets shouted out, I get a notification to my inbox. And I imagine, right, is your partner of the firm is Tasso, right?
Yep, correct.
Did you mention Tasso by name in the article?
I believe I did. Anastasi Pardalis. Yeah,
Okay.
He was the filing attorney.
So I'm sure he got Google notifications too. So like we always say, like, you don't know who's reading your stuff. My story, which I've told years and time again, Darren Ravel read an article of mine and I didn't really put two and two together. Darren Ravel could tweet this thing out and blow up. But like that was my door that opened up. So Stephanie, you wrote a story. You mentioned Tasso by name. You mentioned the firm by name. You basically wrote an article about how good a job they were doing for Giannis. I'm like, shocker, I guess you up. Tasso, hey, wait, I looked you up on LinkedIn. Like, wait, you write other sports law articles? Wait, you went to my same law school that I went to? Wait, you interviewed Mark Lazary, the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, you have some connection with the Milwaukee Bucks who employs Giannis. It's like, okay, so we have so many people that listen to the podcast, and I try to speak to as many people as I can, but like, you guys are all doing great things, but you need to triangulate those signals. I had someone I spoke to, and they're going to remain nameless. And, you know, I don't want to mention the school, but they're like, this person told me confidently, they're not going to give any details, but he's like, I know more about sports than anyone in the entire country. And I'm like, I like the boldness. You don't put out anything that I would know that though. Like, you might know that in your own head, but if you want it, like let's say Coca-Cola, right? They want people to buy their product. They make a commercial or they do a billboard. Like, people can see what they do in some way, shape, or form, but like, congrats, you're the smartest person in the world. It's like the equivalent of working in a windowless office and not being connected to the internet. Like, no one knows that. So you have to do that in creative ways. So, you know, we've had people, and like, we don't just tell these stories to just like, I don't know, to like, for people to write on the website. Like, we want to help people. We have our podcast stuff. You want to hear a crazy thing? When I joined Wallach on the podcast back in June of 2020, I'm not going to say the numbers, but like, we have now gone up 12x in terms of our listenership in the past 2 years. We have a lot of people that listen to the show, and it's because we try to help people. Like, our whole platform, we put out the jobs newsletter that Matt Haig does a great job on, and Tarun, you know, I try to give people advice where we can. Like, I basically say, if you want to write for the website, you could be a published author. And I had 2 people this past week. One had someone with an interview with the NFL Management Committee, and someone else had another big interview in football. And they were people that wrote for the site. And I could say, like, here, show them this article, show them that article. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people that apply to those jobs. But of that subsect of people that apply to those jobs, maybe like, I don't know, 2% will actually have published something in the space. So what's better than one thing, 2 things, 3 things, 4 things? And Steph, I like to brag about you when I go on other shows. Like, you are living proof. Like, you can get a job by like writing, God forbid, putting your name out there, putting your name out in the vortex sometimes does good things. Shocker.
Yeah. And even internships. I specifically remember one internship that I got with a sports and real estate firm while I was in law school. I somehow mentioned that I wrote this was when I only had my own separate blog before we had our website now for Conic Detrimental. I mentioned that I wrote articles about different sports law topics. I sent the hiring attorney, a copy of one of these articles. And when I got the call that I got the internship, he verbatim said, we had a lot of other qualified candidates, but you were the only one that really showed you were passionate about the job. You were willing to, continue learning about the space. And by showing that I had this blog, that's literally why I got the job again. And so I think it only can help you. It can't hurt.
Call it me, Steph. I'm raising my hand for no one that's watching a video.
Mr. Lust.
Okay. So we buried the lead a little bit on this. Stephanie, I hired you for our firm once upon a time. And I saw that you were in the sports law space. And at the time I was looking for someone that I might be able to get along with and that maybe had some shared interests. Like, obviously the work that we did at Garagos when you were there wasn't all sports. It was some percentage of sports, but I'm I don't know, in the times that we're not working in sports, probably good to have someone that's interested in the same things I'm interested in. So I don't know. I knew you were on all forms of social media. I saw you would like interact with different posts. I didn't really know you. I just saw your name. And then I saw you had a sports legal blog. You were vice president of the Sports Law Society. And I'm like, I don't know. I'll probably get along well with this person. And then, like that was it. So you didn't know this, right? It's definitely a shocker. Over under $1 you made from your legal blog that you don't use anymore. Over under.
Oh, it might be in the negatives under.
Negatives, right? But that experience of starting a blog and putting yourself out there, like as I don't know, we'll use the magic word of the day, cringe again, as cringe as it was, right? That like, oh, like I'm putting these articles out and people that I know from college might be reading in law school, how embarrassing is this? But like other people are impressed by that. Like in order to develop clients and get jobs, like you have to put yourself out there. How are people going to know how to use your firm if you're not putting yourself out there? So I saw that. That's a little bit of my mentality. I saw you had it and like, shocker, like it looks like I didn't even know about the first job you got. So Stephanie, the moral of the story, you ended up at a job that I was very happy for you to take. I remember the day you called me up and you're like, hey, I kind of got this other job offer and they represent Giannis and they might take me to the summer league, the NBA summer league in Vegas. Like, can I take this job? And I'm like, Stephanie, I'm not mad at you. Like no brainer. You kind of have to do that. So yeah, I mean, you put yourself in interesting situations, just like, we do this podcast, and we reach a lot of people every week. So who knows what the future comes of it, but like, that's the point. You put yourself out and hopefully good things happen, but you're not going to like, I'll just tell this one quick story. I like that. That's it. This student I was talking to the other week and he has all good intentions. Like he was telling me, he's like, oh, I know there's someone, he knows less about sports law than I do, but he got the job with whatever league it was. I don't want to give anything away. And he goes, I'm like, how do you think he got that job? He's like, he probably knew someone. And I'm like, okay. I don't know how he knew that person, but maybe he knew the person, whoever got this job, his friend of his, from connecting on LinkedIn and writing articles and putting the stuff out. Like, I don't know who the other person was. We didn't say the name, but like the shocker, like the more you put yourself out there, the more people you meet, the more you are in line and engaged in social media and in these different networking things that we do. And, like the more people you are going to meet. So I don't know. I always say this, and I started that group me this week. If anybody wants to join our sports law group me, just certainly reach out. I'm happy to put you on it. But in life, like you're only going to be as successful as your network is strong. People that are going to refer you cases, offer you jobs, offer you career advice and whatnot. Like you're only as strong as your network. And if you just sit in a little box and you're not on social media and you just think to yourself and you look at the mirror and you're like flexing, you're like, oh, I'm so smart. It's small. I'm the greatest. Like, it's not really going to get you anywhere. So don't be a stranger. If you're one of the many listeners to the podcast and you want advice on how to get to that next level of your career, be it, to get from associate level to, get on the partnership track or just getting on the right radars of getting a job. Certainly we're all happy to help. We have a nice little core group here, which is growing. I think our core group's like about 12 writers on the website. We're getting close to well over 100 plus, getting close to 200. But yeah, I'm happy to help in whatever way we can. Steph, this is a fun, career advice. Anything else? Anything else you have?
One other thing, maybe when you're signing up to take the bar exam, you should probably use Themis. I'm just going to throw that out there once again. If you're listening, use Themis. And another thing, like you were saying, you can't be all talk and no action. I'm a big proponent of Twitter. Twitter is the craziest form of social media because for some reason, you are able to connect with people in all different industries, but also we've kind of built a little bit of a sports law community, conduct detrimental community on Twitter. And so if you don't have a Twitter, you should 100% get one because for some reason, at least for me, it's always a little bit easier to, slide into someone's DMs that you want to connect with if you're able to, share an article that you saw on Twitter with them and provide your input and just follow up that way. It's a little bit more of a casual, less intimidating atmosphere. So obviously a good way to stay up and keep up with the news in sports. And so if you don't have a Twitter account, you should definitely create one. And as always, follow the Conduct Detrimental podcast at Con Detrimental on Twitter.
Stephanie, that is a great place to put it. I will note, right? We say these little things like reach out to us if you want to write for the site. Certainly those people are one step ahead of the people that do not. We had a fun one last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever Tarun brought it up. He said, what if there was a student that wants to reach out and handle the marketing efforts for the podcast? And I'm like, if someone wanted to do that, that would be great. Stephanie, we had about, maybe I shouldn't say this. We had a handful of people reach out to take upon that role. And I'm like, I am happy to bring those people into the fold. If you do want to help, if you're like, I really just want to have sports on my resume in some way, shape, or form, that'll help me get a sports job. Stephanie, you don't know this. I spoke to somebody that wants to help run help create a TikTok account or help build up our TikTok presence. And they used to work in basketball. I won't say anything. And they were trying to get back into basketball. and they're like, can I, help you guys in any way? I'm like, sure. The second you get your job at basketball and any sport, you can ditch us, leave us high and dry. It does not matter, but you will have sports on your resume. You can call it whatever you want. I'm happy to be a referral if you really do help us out in some way, shape, or form. But like, it is much easier to get a job while you currently have one, as opposed to just like this person had a decent, not a big gap, but a decent gap in terms of their basketball background, in terms of helping out. So we'll see if that person delivers and the other people that want to help with marketing. But this is our entire site. Our entire site is to help people out. We want to pay it forward. So yeah, I don't have anything else to add, but I'm very passionate about this type of stuff. And I want to make sure we send the message out every couple of months, not just news. We do want to help people out in terms of their career and get into the next phase.
100%. I agree with that. And, if you're listening, continue listening, because we've got some exciting things in the work. Could be a networking event in the future. Keep your eyes out.
Let's end it there. No spoilers. And Steph, you're the best. I appreciate it. I'll take it from here.
All right.
So I did mention that we had some sponsors in the works. We announced our first new sponsor, Horgan and Flengy, and a second sponsor. Listen, it's so funny. You put stuff out there and the people respond. So second new sponsor we're announcing this week is Bettor Edge. Bettor Edge is the first social betting platform. I'm going to speak about it a little bit more, but I'm joined now by Conlan Farrell, we'll say our sports betting expert. Wallach Legal is our sports betting legal expert. But Conlan, you're our only non-lawyer associated with conduct detrimental. Is that true?
It is. So I better be an expert in something. So I believe the betting angle is where I truly show all my talents. So yes, that's where I'll be joining the betting side of things here.
A little bit about Bettor Edge, and then we'll get into Conlan's going to give us a bet each week that he's not going to screw us on, right, Conlan? You promise?
That's the goal. That's the goal, Mr. Lust.
Listen, as a non-lawyer, you can say certain things that you will guarantee a win. Us lawyers cannot say that, but you as the non-lawyer, yeah, you could probably say that. So what is social betting? What is peer-to-peer betting? There is an expression in betting that the house always wins. Peer-to-peer betting is exactly what it sounds like. There are bettors betting against other bettors, and the house does not exist. So Bettor Edge is a site where the bettors literally have the edge because there's no house on the other side. So Bettor Edge is kind of at the cutting edge. They've won a lot of awards. You can look them up. But they reached out to us, after we put the SOS out that we were interested in maybe some partnerships. And we said we do a lot of betting content, and we're happy to talk about it. So we're going to have those guys on. They are over in the great state of Minnesota. If the Golden Gophers were playing the Cornhuskers, obviously I'd have the Cornhuskers. Yeah, our friend Tarun is over in Minnesota as well. So we're going to hook those guys up. So yeah, you can sign up. You get free $20 just by signing up on Bettor Edge. Use our promo code CONDUCT. Free $20 in your pocket, no strings attached, and you'll see how it works. It's basically like the stock market for bets. You get to set the odds, and you'll see if somebody else on the other side wants to take you up on that. So, Conlan, I figured since we're having a betting segment, we'd bring you in. You tell our listeners of a bet that you would recommend that they use on Bettor Edge, or if they're making a bet with their friends and a friendly wager. But Conlan, you're the expert. Listen, I know you got your own fancy betting podcast that you're starting in the coming weeks. Mm-hmm. Dumb it down for our audience. Who do you like this week? And tell us why.
All right. Well, Dan, I appreciate you having me on. Expert right here. I'm going to deliver this week in the NFL. Football's back, thank goodness. And, it's year 2 of the Dan Campbell era in Detroit, the Motor City. And this week they play host to the Washington Commanders, the Carson Wentz-led Commander football team. Right now on Bettor Edge, you can get them at -1.5. That's the Detroit Lions, -1.5. Favored, and that's where I'm going to nail it, book it. The Lions win their first of the 2022 campaign this weekend. Look, I like their offense with the two-headed monster in the backfield, DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams. They got some playmakers outside, St. Brown, Jared Goff's getting better. But really, at the end of the day, I'm just not a Carson Wentz believer. He ran himself out of Indy with the street ball. He ran himself out of Philadelphia originally. So listen, Ford Field, Dan Campbell said he played people on the moon, Mars, wherever. Jail yard, doesn't matter. Ford Field, where they're built Ford tough, the Detroit Lions, is what's going to happen, -1.5, the Lions.
Conlan, I like it. That analysis was actually too smart for the show. We hate Dan Snyder on the show. So if you wanted to say that, that's certainly been enough.
That's true. That's the legal tie-in. See, again, non-lawyer, loving it, bringing it back to the legal side, always here on conduct.
So I watch all of Hard Knocks. So I'm a believer in the Detroit Lions this year. I lost some money live betting the Detroit Lions last week, which
you were a week early.
I bought the Dan Campbell hype. So listen, we will come back with a win. And so, yeah, if you are betting with friends, I would tell you just to go to Bettor Edge, and you can bet with a ton of strangers. You can look up. Interestingly, they have squares on the website. So,
That's-
Conlan, I saw that face there. I've never seen squares at a betting website. It's very
No, and you don't want to be. You want to be like a harpoon. You want to be sharp as a tack. Like
no. I'm talking about Super Bowl squares. I'm talking about betting the
Oh
number.
yeah, already. Oh, okay. I thought because squares means you're on the wrong side. of things.
Listen. We give out some winners here, but they have the version of Super Bowl squares. You pick the number at the end of the quarter. It's a very interesting site. Listen, we're at the cutting edge of podcasts. There are no other sports law podcasts that you guys listen to. We're the number one sports law podcast, and we put up the SOS. We don't say we got a couple outreach from different companies, but Bettor Edge, where I want you guys to do your peer-to-peer betting. So use our promo code conduct, a free $20 in your pocket. And Conlan, Detroit -1.5 is your pick. So Conlan, can you hang with me for a minute?
Yep, absolutely.
So on this episode, we talked about the Brett Favre saga over in Mississippi. We had Stephanie on to talk about career advice and a little bit of sports betting with Conlan Farrell. So we try to bring you guys everything each and every week. Sports fans, lawyers, bettors. I don't know. We just collecting a nice little universe over here. Conlan, you can attest, right? You're the only non-lawyer in that little fun group chat we did.
The only non-attorney amongst some 200 lawyers and prospective law students. But listen, I don't get pushed around. I've been around plenty of you attorneys enough. You don't make guarantees. You don't put your foot in the ground. I'm putting my foot in the ground in Detroit this week -1.5.
We're past the betting segment. We're done. We're on the networking segment. But Conlan, were you pretty impressed? We had 223 people on the group on the networking thing within about an hour.
Listen, believe me, I'm beyond impressed. Everything I tell you, Dan, again, you speak it into existence. I follow blindly, and you guys always lead us into the promised land. A bunch of different things, seeing conduct grow as it has over the past couple of years. And like you said, we put it out there. Now Bettor Edge, a nice partner here with us. It's cool to see where conduct detrimental is growing and going to continue to go. Again,
Conlan, you are our only non-lawyer, but Conlan, you've kind of been like the flag bearer. I guess Brendan Bell is kind of like a pre-law guy. I mean, listen, the network's open to everyone at this stage of conduct. We are in the incubatory phase, so we're trying to grow. We're trying to bring smart people on that know what they're doing and help know how to grow the platform. So I have been pretty good at setting people up with jobs. Sometimes I can hire people, but more often than I'm setting people up with other people that maybe have jobs for people. So certainly starts here. If you're looking to get sports on your resume, betting on your resume in some way, shape, or form, Conlan, you are a good one for it. And now you're often starting your own podcast. What's your podcast? When is your podcast launching?
We are going to launch hopefully this week. We are working out some final technical details, nailing down some personalities. First in Parlay will be debuting across my Twitter platform. That's at Conlan, CONLAN_Farrell, F like Frank, ARRELL. That's on my Twitter platform. We use StreamYard, give you some graphics up there, probably a couple college games a week, the NFL, and then more. But always be back here with you, Dan, too, to drop a pick or two.
All good. We are in support of the entrepreneurs in the sports space as well as in the legal space. So people starting their own law firms, their own podcasts, and I'm all for it. On behalf of Dan Wallach, myself, the entire extended Conduct Detrimental family, our new sponsors, and to everyone's new ventures going on left and right, we will see you next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.